Hello and welcome to the International Mentoring Community, All Things Mentoring Lounge. I'm Stephen Hobbs. With me is Doug Lawrence. We are the co-founders of IMC, the International Mentoring Community. We'll introduce ourselves here a little bit, but I just wanted to share about what's the topic today. What's the broadcast going to cover? So we're going to take a look at the storyline of mentoring certification system, especially the one that we've created, but it's prompted because of a couple of articles that we found, one around this notion of the black box of mentoring programs, suggesting there's things that are hidden away, and also, is there a need for something like paraprofessional mentoring? And those sort of sparked us to share this presentation today. But it's also the seventh in a series, and the other six are listed below in the show more notes. And it's just to go over the action outcomes that are associated with getting certification from the international mentoring community. And we're going to answer the question, well, now what? It's great that we know about the certification, but so what? What else? Now what? Let's take a look at it, and Doug and I are going to cover that off with you, and encourage you to drop in any comments you have, and we'll take them and see what happens from there. So Doug, you want to introduce yourself, and then I'll do it myself, and then we'll just share the definition of mentoring and get ourselves into the broadcast. So over to you.
So I am Doug Lawrence, and I am one of the co-founders of the International Mentoring Community. I also have my own practice, Talent C, where we basically all things mentoring are things that we do. And with the International Mentoring Community, I am the Director of Practice and Outreach.
Great. And I am the Director of Education and Certification. So often you meet Doug to come in, and then you meet me along the way, and then Doug and I interact with you near the end of this thing called certification, which is why we want to do our presentation today. I also have my own company, Wealth Movement, WELLTH. I work with olders to be elders, especially involved with nature. And mentoring is in there because the olders to elders, they have lived experience, and they can use mentoring as a way in which to share their experience. So I also would just like to add is that Doug has a very deep practice in mentoring, and I tend to have a bit more of a surface, just simply because I'm doing the education certification. Doug is doing the practice and outreach, and therefore you can talk to either of us about what's going on through the comments section. You can get a hold of us through the internationalmentoringcommunity.com contact page if you have a question for us, and it's also a great place to go learn a little bit more about what we're up to. So as we always do on our broadcast, we share our definition of mentoring, and then just unpack a couple of key thoughts in there, and we're going to have Doug do that. Doug, over to you.
All right, thank you. So the definition that we use is mentoring is a two-way trusted relationship where the mentor and mentee learn and grow together through personal and professional development.
Anything in there in particular you want to unpack today?
Usually, for me, the things that are really important, especially when we're dealing with the mentor certification, is the understanding of the two-way trusted relationship, but also the aspect that with this, that we strongly encourage, promote, whichever term or terms you want to use, the aspect of it's a collaborative approach to learning. So the mentor and the mentee learn and grow together, and they do that through their personal and their professional development. And so that's, that's some of the key things that come out in that certification journey.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things that Doug and I always stress is that even though we're sort of speaking about certification for the mentor is sharing a lot of what it is that is happening, which means the mentee could then pick up the mantle of mentor and go for their own certification, because it is this two-way interaction, collaborative conversation. And I think that that's something to remember. So even though we're having fun here, with the mentor, we're also attempting to figure out ways in which to get the mentee up and into the world of mentoring, not just as a, oh, thank you, got it. Oh, hang on a minute, I can do this. And that's where we're going with it. So because we're going into certification today, let's just take a look at what is certification and how does it apply to IMC. We will be going through the 5 pillars of the certification system that we do use. But just before we jump into it, certification, Doug, when you first got involved in mentoring, you were on a path looking for something that had a certification story attached to it. I think it might be helpful if people just understand a little bit, from a broad perspective, the steps that you were going through and looking for certification. And that will provide sort of one definition, and then I'm going to provide the more logical, step-by-step kind of concept. So you were in deep practice looking for certification. Why don't you share a little bit of that story?
Well, it was part of my vision, or my dream was that I wanted to be able to create a independent body for the certification of mentors. That was the big thing that I saw that was missing from sort of the mentoring landscape, for lack of a better choice of words. And so I did a bunch of research. I found that there really wasn't much out there for certification of mentors. And so that was a gap that I felt that we could, at that time point, it was basically just me, that I could fill. And so I did a bunch of research, and I found a couple organizations that were in a place where they could provide that certification, but only from a knowledge perspective, not from a taking their ability to apply that knowledge in an actual work situation or in a mentoring situation. And so I partnered with them. We continued with one of them. We continued on the journey. And then the mentoring community spoke to me and said, this is all fine. This is great. However, we want to be certified competent as a mentor, understanding that there's an element of knowledge that's required and all that, but we want to be certified as competent. And so we want you to, go down that path and put something together, and we'll go along with you on your journey. And so that's when, ironically, you and we kind of crossed paths at about that time point, when the company that I was partnering with at that time decided they didn't want to go any further. So it was perfect timing for us to get into that conversation. Now, what's interesting here is that what sort of fortified the decision to move forward with certification from my perspective was the aspect that when I would be sitting down with prospective clients where mentoring was going to be, we would be doing some things that were mentoring related, I was always asked the question, why should we pick you over somebody else? And it was because of that it became abundantly clear that the business landscape is changing, and what it's starting to do is recognize that mentoring is a business tool that they can use, and that, here we have somebody who is invested in their own learning, and that we have basically what we've got is here's a market differentiator that we can latch onto, because here's somebody who is certified, that has gone through, the steps to demonstrate that they're competent in that particular field, in the mentoring field. And so that was a long-winded story, but that's kind of the story, the journey that I've been on.
And I think what we'll pull out of that, I'll add the little bit of the logic component, because I do the education certification side of this. And as Doug mentions, we did meet along the way. The first thing around this notion of to confirm the competence, which is, to confirm the concept knowledge and the practice skills. There is an importance there to confirm that. And what we do is we tend to use a word like certification, we use a word like competence, And a lot of that actually links back into the ISO world, the International Standards Organization world, if anyone wants to explore that. It's in the 17,024, I think it is, and they talk about conformity assessment around competence, and that's where we lean into and we take from ideas for that. So it is a confirmation for the business landscape that Doug is talking about. So there's a second part. Yes, it confirms it for you, but it also provides legitimacy, a connection with the business landscape. But there's a third component I'd like to bring out, and that's especially for those who may be, I think I might like to mentor, or I've been mentoring, but I'm not quite sure I've got it all figured out just yet. So those new, those just entering, Doug and I will always share, and in all ways, then that's a good time to get certification. If you're just starting up, if you're new to it, because there's nowhere along the way that says you must have certification for mentoring, even though the business world is starting to ask for it. I get that, but it's not a mandatory feature at this point in time. However, part of why we're doing our conversation today, there might be something that is coming down the pathway that we're going to pick up, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. That's around the paraprofessional storyline. But I just wanted to bring out that if you're new, you're getting into it, certification is a great way, confirm, but it's also for a self-evident perspective. It also gives you clarity and confidence. So you're not going to waste time, effort, and money as you're moving forward. And if you are going to hang your shingle out to be a mentor for whatever it is that you're talking about, then the certification is a great way to organize, manage, deliver mentoring in a much more coherent way. And I think coherence is an important word that we would bring forward in terms of mentoring, especially from the future. If we're thinking about the future and bringing it into the present, this is a really good idea. So I just wanted to take the logic aspects of what Doug's story presented and just add a little bit more in-depth component to that of why we as IMC do what we do around the certification. Is there anything you want to pick up in there at all, Doug?
No, I think that's good.
Okay, so I think what we'll do is we'll share the 5 pillars. I think that would be a great idea. Now, 5 pillars, it's because it's really easy to put a hand up and follow what's going on. So I'm just going to move from my pinky to my thumb, all right, as we move forward. So the first pillar that we're talking about is the notion of the profile. Now, the profile is a list of what are called action outcome statements. Action outcome in that the action has an action verb. The outcome is if you take that action, what kind of outcome will you get as it relates to mentoring and mentorship and being a mentor. It's that kind of component. Now, what becomes interesting here is that that profile is like a learning contract. So if you're going to do professional development, continuous education or something like that, you could grab the profile that we've created. And when you go through the second pillar, okay, so we talk about the pillar of profile, the second pillar is self. So you could do a self-assessment on that profile of those action outcome statements, answering the question, can I take that action to get that outcome? Because if you can, then in a sense, the profile in your self-assessment starts to lean into what's called the accountability agreement that you're working with. I'm now accountable. I'm going to find out if I can confirm that I have the knowledge and skills, or what we talk about as the concepts and practices. So you've got a learning contract and accountability agreement in the first 2 pillars of what it is we're talking about. And that alone is of great value to anyone who's getting into mentoring, because, okay, here's a group of people who say, these are the action outcomes for mentoring and serve as a mentor. This is my self-assessment against it. Doug, I don't think anyone can go wrong if you just grabbed that and did it and didn't do any more with this.
Yeah.
However, I would encourage you to do more. But anything you want to add about the profile and self-assessment? Because Doug went through them as well, right? Doug said, look, I want to deepen my understanding of what this is about. So he's actually gone through and done the certification process. So is there anything that would be wise wisdom you would like to share about those two pillars?
Well, and I've also done the self-assessment. So, or not, sorry, the recertification, which
True. Yes.
Yeah. So I've done that, and that also helps validate and refortify my mentoring practice and how I interact. But for me, going through the self-assessment is I think, I know that your suggestion or your advice that if you do nothing but take the self-assessment, it's going to give you, and it did for me, it helped me identify where I may have some gaps in my knowledge and my skills, and then I could go and figure out how am I going to get that. In my case, it was maybe writing a book or two, and taking my learnings from that and using that to be able to help close that gap. So the self-assessment, whether you plan on getting certified or whether you plan on even continuing in mentoring, it's still worth the time and effort to go through that self-assessment, and then just take a step back from there and sort of say, okay, now what?
Yeah, and it's a great question. Now what? Because what Doug is talking about is the third pillar, which is the education. So if you have the profile, do the self-assessment, you're going to end up with answering the question, can I do that action outcome statement? And it's going to be yes or no. And yes means I've got the concepts and practices associated with. No means I'm probably missing either concepts and or practices. And therefore, I got to go get education. So in a sense, what the education does is it collects the evidence, right, that you are turning your nose to yeses, confirming your yeses, and therefore you are creating a portfolio. And we talk about it's a product folio, process folio. Now, the products, what are the things that I have done? Process folio, what are the actions that I have actually taken? What have I done by reflecting on them so that I can continue to develop my practice? But as I build up, I did 50 mentoring arrangements over the course of the last couple of years. Okay, that's a little different than someone who might do, I did 100. Not that it's a competition, but in there, not to negate that, but in there is deep practice, deep learning, and that's what becomes really important to us. So when we're done the education component of it, and you've got your portfolio, guess what? This is the time to submit that along with the certification package to go through what we call verification. In other words, this is the time that we verify to confirm concepts and practices. So in a sense, what you now do is you have this confirmation, all right? In other words, you have documentation that you now have the knowledge, skills, and attitude of mentoring. And therein, again, to Doug's point about the story he shared, it's that confirmation that keeps moving you forward, right? And it's based on what is called a reasonable approach, all right? And this is important because people go, well, how do I know that? Or how do I know that? How do I know that? Well, that's why it's reasonable. You've got the profile, you've got the self-assessment, you've got the evidence of filling in the education, you've gone through verification by a verifier and or a committee of the confirmation. This is a reasonable approach that by this point you could say, I think I know how to mentor. I have been mentoring. I've got practice as a mentor. I think I can apply for my certification. And that's where IMC comes in through all of what we're doing, and because we've done the certification with us, you just applied for your certification, and we can give that to you. And guess what? That also serves a value. Is number 5. You now have your presentation document. Now, some people put it up on the wall. Some people will send it as a PDF, as Doug's point about, well, do you actually have certification? Yeah, here's my certificate from, and people can then check, well, who's the IMC? And they can check and find out, is this legit? All this kind of stuff. Again, we have a learning contract, the accountability agreement, the portfolio, the documentation, and obviously the presentation documentation. So that's sort of like the 5 pillars and why we do what it is that we do. Is there anything you want to add to that, Doug?
Just that for me, what was extremely important was the verification piece, and actually going through that. And I've been through it now a couple times. So it's that helps from a practice perspective to be able to have that sort of in your hip pocket.
Yeah, and I think that's important, all right? Because some people forget about how important that verification is. Because again, the term what used earlier is it's a collaborative conversation between the verifier and the person who is actually the applicant. Now, sometimes we may have to get a committee together, like when we do our certificate of practice for Journey Mentor, we ask that there's some committee members come in, people who have experience of the applicant will come in because of the nature of what we're doing. And Doug, we created it to support the mentors going through the IMC, but also in the mental health area. So it's important to have that committee to, from this reasonable approach again, to be able to support a confirmation. Do you want to add anything about that? Because I think that's an important, it's reasonable, but it's also reasonable in terms of where we're using it as well.
It's because we had a couple people on the panel that were verifiers. We had one individual who was a practicing mentor, and then we had an individual who was an educator and a practitioner in the mental health space, because I actually had taken some training from their organization, which ironically then helped me identify somebody who would be a good potential candidate for, going through your vetting process to make sure that they had what you were looking for. So for me, knowing that there's somebody on a panel that, especially with the Journey Mentor, because part of that process is to be able to mentor in the mental health space. And so the aspect is it's validating, reassuring, it verifies that, we're going through a process here that's going to help validate that if I do mentor in the mental health space, I have demonstrated that I am able to do so, and do so with some degree of confidence. Yeah, with some degree of confidence.
Yeah. So again, it's that presentation document, which comes from the documentation of the verification. It all helps, right? And I think that's where it becomes important. We're going to list 2 articles that just came out through one of the universities, and they have an institute where they do a lot of research about mentoring. It tends to be more with the youth element, but they're bringing up 2 really important points. One is about the black box of mentoring programs. All right. In other words, what's hidden away? Is there something hidden away? And the other one is around, what do we do? Is it time to take a look at mentoring as possibly as a paraprofessional, right? And is there such a thing as the notion of, in the mental health area, for example, or youth mentoring, a stepped care approach? Therefore, the idea of, do we need something along the lines of paraprofessional? And that's what got us thinking a little bit more about why we do what we do. And I'll deal with it in terms of my own, from a black box point of view, is that if you're going to mentor, and Doug was mentioning this from the business landscape point of view, is that by providing the profile and the self-assessment, the education verification certification system that we have, it actually takes it out of a black box. It's not hidden away. It's out there in the open, and it helps to benefit not only the mentor, the mentee, but the organization as a whole in terms of it mentoring for the workplace kind of program. So I think it has great value there. Anything you want to add to the notion of the black box as they talk about it?
The one thing that, and you talk about different approaches to mentoring and that come out of that. I think that I know that I myself, when it comes to mentoring programs, that I typically try to customize what that's going to look like to the organization itself, and getting away from the misconception that one size fits all, because it doesn't. And you need to understand what the client wants from, and do they actually comprehend what mentoring can do for their organization and their people. And then now we add the mental health component on top of that. Do you even have stuff in place today, to be able to deal with any mental health challenges that your organization's going to face? So I think, from a black box, I think that there's a customization piece, and it's talked about in the article. But I firmly believe, and I tell the people that if somebody approaches me to come into their organization, I make it very abundantly clear that we're going to customize a solution for their organization, because I've seen what happens when we don't do that.
Yeah. And I also, in their article, what they were sharing was there seems to be like a lack of theories and research that are going on. I'm not quite sure that I would agree with it, okay, but that's me personally, because I think, well, Doug and I have had a couple of people do some research, and we've done some research with some universities around it. And I believe that this university is doing what it's doing as well, and it'll be acknowledged in the show more notes. But I think what's important here is that there is what's called phenomenology, which is the study of a phenomena, the phenomena being mentoring made up of mentor and mentee. So there is a study of this arrangement, this relationship, and I believe it really comes out through this certification, this now what process. I think we're adding to it every time we do this. And as we advance the confidence, the clarity that goes with mentoring, is that we're actually helping to move this forward. And I believe that the guidelines that we're providing through the steps that one takes adds more credibility to what's going on. And I'll use the word coherence, like I did earlier, gives the coherence to the mentoring as well. So I think to Doug's point and my point, I think we're on track to say, I don't think there's really a black box really there. And if anyone does feel it is there, then let's have a chat and let's take a look at it. But the other one was around this notion of there's a promise being made from a mentoring point of view, not that the promise that you're going to get the specific outcome that the mentee is looking for, but there is a promise that of the mentoring that the mentor does, it is of confirmed competence. The knowledge and skills are being used in a correct way. And therefore, there's a sort of, you might use a word like stepped care, a caring approach that's there. And you're moving through the mentoring so that you can actually get to a point where the person can make their decisions based on what they have learned through this two-way conversation. Am I fair in that part, Doug?
Yep, you are.
Yeah. So that brings out the story of the paraprofessional. We know there's professionals like doctors and lawyers, and nursing is into that world. There are the paraprofessional, like teaching aides and social workers, and they're ones who have to follow a little bit more stricter guidelines about how they're going to interact with people. So there is this question put out, like a question bubble that was put out do we or can we or should we do that with mentoring? And Doug, I know from the mental health point of view, from a holistic psychological safety, I believe there's also a holistic social safety aspect that goes here, like mentoring for the workplace programs that we're talking about. So Doug and I have been starting to take a look at, do we put forward what we're doing into the paraprofessional world and encourage more people to take a look at that? And we would love to hear from you. What do you think? And if you want to share in the comments section or on our contact page, that would be really great. I know that they're looking at it because dealing with children. Again, remember this University Institute is dealing with youth and children. So I could certainly see like teacher's aid, paraprofessional, mentoring support as paraprofessional. But I think we can continue and extend that even into workplaces. Anything you want to add to that storyline, Doug?
Well, just that I had an example yesterday of where somebody who has been diagnosed with a mental health condition ended up reaching out to me to provide support that they had nobody else to turn to. And they couldn't go back to the psychologist, psychiatrist, social worker, counselor, all of that, because they're already booked. And so they said, and so to make a long story short, what really came out of it was the aspect of I gave them the environment or created the environment for them to talk their way through what they were experiencing and how it made them feel. And I did what good mentors would do. I had, it was non-judgmental, but what I also did was I listened and I heard what they were saying. And then I was able to maybe guide a little bit, or maybe, just do some things that were going to help them deal with the anxiety that they all of a sudden were faced with.
Yeah, so there's something there, and I think we're going to have to start taking a look at it. There's a lot of things happening in a social, cultural milieu, right, in workplaces, in society as a whole. So I think it might be something that's going to come more on the agenda, and you'll probably hear more about it through us here at the IMC as we unfold, and we are presenting what we're doing to different groups to sort of see if this is of value to them, and see how we get to from that perspective. So today was really about, okay, there's a mentoring certification, there is a system that goes with it, which is the 5 pillars. The now what is to take into consideration around this notion of paraprofessional, and yes, it does take the black box away kind of idea. We just wanted to share a little bit of that with you. Again, this was the 7th video in a series. The other 6 will be listed, and they cover off, for the most part, most of the action outcome statements associated with going through the profile self-assessment into education. So you can get a bit of a heads up there. And again, on the imc.com homepage, you can click the button, get access to it if you want to do your self-assessment. Again, if you want to move forward, what you do is you just book a time with Doug, and you get a chance to talk to Doug about what's going on and what you want to do. And we'll get you in, and we can get you started down the certification pathway. So lots of things open here for you in terms of what it is that you want to do. I just want to remind you that on Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Mountain, we have this live broadcast, and you can certainly find it on our International Mentoring Community YouTube channel, and on the mental health community page on Facebook. And if you wanted to check up there as well. So I think that that's getting us towards a close. Obviously, please subscribe, and comments are always appreciated. Continue to learn with you. And I think that's where we're headed towards closing, aren't we, Doug? I think we covered off everything? Yep, okay. So as we always do on our broadcasts, I'm the one who brings us in. I asked Doug to share something that he wants to share as closing. When I know we're at that point of closing, I'll just say take care, and I will close off the broadcast. So over to you, Doug.
So for our listeners today, what I hope you will take away from this is that going through the certification process gave me an extreme amount of confidence in my mentoring capabilities. And it also was obviously validated if we go back to the story of me actually indicating, well, the reason you need to hire me to help you out is because I am a certified mentor. And I'm doing a lot of podcasts, and those podcasts are one of the things we always talk about is the fact that I'm an international certified mentor. So there's a lot of value that you can get and take away from going through that certification process.
Thank you, and take care, everyone.